Hello and welcome back to the Ass Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Album of the Week. This, of course, is episode number 43. This episode, of course, is another anniversary, special. Of course, going to an album that's actually going to be turning 40. And that'll be on October 5th, and that's, of course, is the second album from, of course, a classic American heavy metal band, Riot. And probably one of my personal favorite albums from this band, that's Narita. Definitely the second of the, I would say the classic lineup of just Mark Reale, Guy Speranza, and Rick Ventura. Which, of course, the drummer and bass player being, of course, Jimmy Iommi and, Peter Patelli would leave after this one after only being with the band since the Rock City album, which was their very first album. And I think right now I'll just go to the album cover and talk a little bit about Rock City, which, of course, was their debut album released on the very independent label Fire Sign Records, which was, I believe, was Steve Loeb's label, but it's also can be considered the Riot's own label because they couldn't strike a deal with Capitol, which eventually they would with this album, but with Narita at least, what we're talking about. But Rock City was their very first album here, which was definitely one of the shorter albums within their catalog, released back in 1977, but it was definitely a solid debut album and definitely showed or gave everyone, who at least purchased the album, even from their shows, would at least get a taste of what this band was. And even for like 1977, it's got some heavy tracks on there, definitely being one, definitely alongside maybe some of the British metal bands like either Judas Priest or Motorhead, or even Saxon and some of those kind of bands. Definitely being one of the earliest heavy metal bands. And of course, for anyone that ever, of course, kind of what going on with, Scott Waters' video on heavy metal in the 70s, and basically the argument that heavy metal wasn't in the 70s. Just check out at least Riot's Rock City and Narita to get a really good idea that, or at least maybe change your mind that metal was in the 70s, and there are some heavy stuff on these. It's definitely not too far off from your new wave British heavy metal stuff, but it definitely is here, at least on these first two Riot albums that came out in the latter part of this 1970s, and that's definitely what something you got with Rock City. So finally moving in, they finally did struck a deal with Capitol Records, and again, it was the recordings for at least Narita that at least changed their mind, because apparently Capitol were just not completely sold with them on Rock City. Could be fair enough. Rock City definitely is probably not. I would say it's definitely not their best record, even though it has some solid numbers on there, like for sure Warrior, the opening track, which is just going on to the would be Desperation, Overdrive, and of course I think those are the only three that really comes to mind is Heart of Fire, Warrior, and Desperation and Overdrive are definitely some of the four of the most really hard-hitting, heavy tracks off that album that definitely could, I would say, contend with some of the best of the really metallic, almost some of the heaviest stuff, at least from Aerosmith off of Rocks, or even, for sure, maybe Judas Priest on, like, Killing Machine, or AKA Hellbent for Leather. It's like, I would say it definitely contends with some of those, or even some of the best from, like, either Iron Maiden, and so on. Just good shit. But here on their follow-up album, Narita, they definitely kick it up a little bit more of a notch. They definitely start putting some extra nitrogen, definitely some nitrogen almost within this. It's nitroglycerin, I think is the best way, because it's just completely a lot more fired up here. Especially with songs such as 49er, Kick Down the Wall, the instrumental title track, which is definitely, again, can be considered one of the earliest speed metal tunes, alongside the song Warrior from the previous album to, of course, do it up. Here we go again. Some of the heaviest parts of that one are the blistering, almost really hot track that's called "Heart for Love." That's that guitar solo break that almost pretty much closes out that entire track. Is some literally some some of the heaviest stuff for at least this period. And of course, White Rock, and of course the very classic, the song that ends the whole entire album, Road Racing, which again definitely is some quality headbanging shit right there for at least 1979. Like there is some rather heavy metallic stuff on this album that I would put right up there to some of the best heavy metal albums that come out from at least the early to mid 80s, or at least whatever was coming out in the late 70s. I think what was considered heavy at that time. That's something you get with Narita. 10 tracks definitely, of course, kind of lengthens the whole album, of course, because it clocks in around 43 minutes and 35 seconds. But this was definitely a solid album. Of course, their cover of Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild, which is a song that's been covered by countless of bands, even also being covered by, of course, Anvil Live. But Riot's version and Anvil's version are definitely one of the heaviest versions I've heard, at least for this song. And of course, alongside Raven's version as well, which I shouldn't count that version out as well. I will say they are the three bands for sure that definitely do a really good version of this almost iconic, pretty much an iconic track, especially for the late 60s, because it was definitely one of the earliest really sort of true hard rock numbers to come out of the late 60s that definitely had that sort of 60s going in the 70s sound. But again, they just do, of course, their version, I would say definitely for both Anvil's and Riot's version, are definitely more so derived from Slade's version that appeared on Slade Alive. So definitely name dropping another sort of classic band that mostly gets remembered for being the band that Quiet Riot covered about 2 times. But still, there is definitely some solid stuff on this album, and definitely 40 years. That is an achievement for this album. Of course, these days, Riot goes by the name of Riot V, which I don't want to completely go into because it's definitely going to go into some rather messy territories. But still, of course, even after some of the late members being no longer here, like Mark Reale and, of course, Guy Speranza, sadly no longer being with us, they definitely left a legacy. And this album, I would say, is definitely part of their, along also with their with the second album, or the album that would follow up Narita, Fire Down Under. Both these two, I would definitely say, deserves to be on the annals of like pretty much hard rock and heavy metal and so on. It just deserves to be on that history because these are definitely, I would say, some of the early sort of groundbreaking albums that definitely was pushing the sort of rock genre and, of course, that early metal genre to new lengths that was definitely going to be taken even further within the 1980s. So with that, definitely to celebrate such a classic release, and of course to celebrate its 4th anniversary, definitely this whole week at least busts out some classic right now. Of course, this album, and just spin them and raise a glass while you're at it, if you at least or happen to have at least a good alcoholic drink. So with that, hope you all enjoyed. This is Every Thrashhead. Sam out. I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone, and let's also kick off October for this channel. Take care.